What scientists discovered beneath the Antarctic ice didn't just surprise them, it broke something they thought they understood about life itself. In January of 2025, a slab of ice the size of an entire city broke away from the edge of Antarctica. And for the first time in centuries, sunlight touched water that had been sealed away since before some of the world's oldest cities were built. A research ship happened to be close enough to reach the site within days, an almost impossible stroke of timing in one of the most remote places on Earth. When the crew lowered a camera into the newly exposed depths, expecting nothing but dark, empty seafloor, what came back on the monitor made experienced scientists go silent. There were forests of sponges taller than a person, giant sea spiders crawling across the rock, pale, ghost-like fish gliding through water that had no business supporting anything alive. Somewhere down there, in total darkness, cut off from sunlight for hundreds of years, an entire ecosystem had been quietly thriving the whole time. Nobody knew it existed. And the question that immediately followed the astonishment was the one that still doesn't have a full answer. How does anything survive down there at all? To understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to understand what scientists believed about the underside of Antarctica before this discovery. For most of modern history, the space beneath Antarctica's massive floating ice shelves was treated as one of the most hostile environments on the planet, arguably closer to the surface of another world than to anywhere else on Earth. No sunlight reaches it. Temperatures hover just above freezing, sometimes below it. The water sits under crushing pressure, sealed off from the open ocean by ice that, in some places, is thicker than the height of the world's tallest skyscrapers. Every basic rule of survival seemed to say that nothing complex could live there, because almost every food chain on the surface of our planet begins with sunlight. Plants and algae capture that light, convert it into energy, and everything else, from fish to whales to us, ultimately depends on that chain. Take away the sun, and traditionally, you take away the foundation the entire system stands on. That's why finding thriving colonies of animals in total permanent darkness didn't just add a new species to a list, it challenged an assumption scientists had built their understanding of ocean life around for generations. The story of this particular discovery begins with an iceberg. On the 13th of January in 2025, a massive chunk of the George VI ice shelf along the Antarctic Peninsula snapped away from the mainland and drifted into the Bellingshausen Sea. This wasn't a small event. The iceberg that broke free was measured at roughly 510 square kilometers, a piece of ice large enough to be compared to the entire footprint of the city of Chicago. For most of history, an event like this would have gone almost entirely unstudied, simply because reaching that remote stretch of Antarctic coastline in time to examine the newly exposed seafloor is logistically brutal. But this time, a research vessel from the Schmidt Ocean Institute happened to be operating nearby, already conducting unrelated research in the region. When word came through that the ice shelf had calved, the crew made a decision that would end up rewriting a page of marine biology. They redirected the ship toward the sea's newly exposed area and prepared a remotely operated vehicle to descend into water that no human, no camera, no scientific instrument of any kind had ever observed. What happened next changed everything the team expected to find. As the underwater vehicle descended past 300 meters, then past 600, then deeper still, the seafloor that came into view wasn't barren. It was alive. The footage showed corals branching outward like frozen fireworks, sea anemones swaying gently in slow currents, massive sponges, some appearing centuries old, forming underwater gardens across the rock. And drifting through it all were creatures built for permanent darkness, pale ice fish with almost translucent bodies, an octopus resting motionless more. Then a kilometer below the surface, and sea spiders larger than anything typically seen in shallower waters. Dr. Patricia Esquete, the lead scientist aboard the expedition, later described the reaction on board as pure disbelief, the kind of moment where a team of trained researchers simply stared at the screen because what they were witnessing didn't match anything in the scientific literature. This wasn't a barren, ice-locked wasteland. It was a hidden world that had been operating in complete secrecy for what may have been hundreds of years. But this wasn't the strangest part of the discovery. The stranger question was how any of it was possible in the first place. Ecosystems like this typically depend on what scientists call marine snow, tiny particles of organic material that drift down from sunlit waters near the surface, feeding everything living below. Under a thin layer of sea ice, that process can still happen, weakened but present. But this ecosystem sat beneath a shelf of ice roughly 150 meters thick, sealed off from the open ocean and from any meaningful sunlight for centuries at a time. There should have been almost nothing for these organisms to eat. And yet there they were, not just surviving, but apparently thriving, some of the sponges having grown to sizes that would normally take decades, if not centuries, to reach. Researchers currently believe the answer may lie in ocean currents, deep, cold flows of water that could be transporting nutrients sideways from distant open water, rather than relying on food falling straight down from above. It's an important distinction, because if true, it means life beneath Antarctic ice. Shelves isn't just clinging to survival in isolated pockets. It may be connected by hidden underwater highways of nutrients running for miles beneath the ice, sustaining ecosystems that scientists are only now beginning to map. This wasn't the first time something unexpected had been found beneath Antarctica's ice, and understanding those earlier discoveries helps explain why this new one hit the scientific community so hard. Years earlier, a research team working beneath the Ross Ice Shelf, the largest ice shelf on the entire continent, drilled a narrow borehole through the ice using a specially designed underwater robot to explore what lay beneath. What they expected was mud and silence. What they found instead was a colony of pale, ghost-like sea anemones burrowed directly into the underside of the ice itself, living upside down, using the ice shelf the way most animals use a seafloor. No one had ever documented anemones doing this anywhere on Earth. Alongside them, the same expedition recorded a strange, cylindrical creature gliding through the frigid water that the team, only half joking, nicknamed the egg roll because nothing about its shape matched any known species in their reference records. To this day, its exact identity remains an open question, one of several small mysteries still waiting beneath the Antarctic ice for someone to solve. Scientists weren't prepared for what they found in a separate expedition either, this time hundreds of miles away beneath the Filchner-Rana ice shelf along the Weddell. C. A team from the British Antarctic Survey drilled through nearly 3,000 feet of solid ice, aiming to collect sediment samples from the seafloor below. But when their drill struck something solid, they realized they'd hit a boulder rather than the soft mud they expected. Lowering a camera down out of scientific curiosity rather than the original plan, they discovered something nobody anticipated. Attached to the rock were colonies of stationary animals, almost certainly sponges, growing in a location more than 50 miles from open water and buried beneath one of the thickest, oldest sections of ice on the planet. According to Dr. Hugh Griffiths, one of the researchers involved, existing scientific models had suggested this kind of environment was simply too cold, too dark, and too nutrient-starved to support this kind of life. The sponges on that boulder didn't seem to know that. They had been growing there anyway. What ties these discoveries together is a pattern scientists are only starting to fully appreciate. Antarctica's ice shelves aren't the dead, frozen barriers they were long assumed to be. Underneath them lies a hidden, interconnected layer of ocean, one that has remained almost completely unexplored simply because reaching it requires enormous logistical effort, specialized drilling equipment, and, in the case of the George VI discovery, an extraordinary coincidence of timing. Every time researchers have managed to get equipment beneath the ice, whether through natural events like an iceberg breaking away or through deliberate drilling operations, they found something living there that wasn't supposed to exist according to the science of the time. This raises an uncomfortable but exciting question for marine biology. If life keeps turning up in places assumed to be empty, how much of the world beneath Antarctica's ice remains completely unmapped? And what else might be waiting down there that nobody has looked for yet? There was one discovery, separate from Antarctica's ice shelves but closely connected in spirit, that added an entirely new dimension to this mystery. Researchers drilling beneath the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf discovered something nobody was searching for, a hidden underground river flowing more than 1,600 feet beneath the surface of the ice. When the team lowered a camera into the newly discovered channel, hundreds of small shrimp-like creatures called amphipods swarmed into view almost immediately, clearly living and moving within this hidden waterway, as though it were an ordinary part of their world. The discovery suggested that beneath Antarctica's frozen surface lies not just isolated pockets of life clinging to survival, but potentially entire circulatory systems of moving water, carrying nutrients, organisms, and quite possibly warmth from one region to another beneath the ice. It reframed how scientists think about the Antarctic underworld, not as a series of disconnected frozen tombs, but as something closer to a living, flowing network, hidden from view but very much active. Explaining how any of these creatures survive requires understanding one basic truth about life on Earth, and then watching Antarctica quietly break that truth apart, piece by piece. Nearly every food chain we understand relies on photosynthesis, the process by which sunlight is converted into usable energy near the surface. Beneath these ice shelves, sunlight doesn't exist at all, and hasn't for centuries in some locations. Yet the animals filmed by these expeditions weren't dying off or barely surviving. Sponges especially were found at sizes that, based on typical growth rates observed elsewhere, would suggest ages stretching back decades or even centuries, quietly expanding in total isolation the entire time. Some scientists studying these sites now suspect that a combination of deep ocean currents, chemical processes occurring on the seafloor itself, and slow moving nutrient transport from far outside the ice shelf's edge may be responsible. It's important to note that this remains an area of active, ongoing research rather than settled fact. No single explanation has been confirmed, and it's entirely possible that different ecosystems beneath different ice shelves are surviving through different combinations of these processes. What's certain is that the old assumption, no sunlight equals no meaningful life, no longer holds up beneath Antarctica's ice. There was one final discovery nobody expected, and it may end up being the most important part of this entire story. Scientists studying these hidden ecosystems have started drawing comparisons far beyond Earth's own oceans. Several icy moons in our solar system, including Europa, which orbits Jupiter, and Enceladus, which orbits Saturn, are believed to hide vast oceans of liquid water underneath their frozen surfaces, sealed away from sunlight in almost exactlies, the same way Antarctica's sub-ice ecosystems are sealed away from it. For decades, one of the biggest questions in the search for life beyond Earth has centered on whether life can exist in total darkness, cut off from a star's energy entirely. Every animal filmed beneath Antarctica's ice, every unexpected sponge colony, every ghost-like anemone burrowed into solid ice, quietly strengthens the case that the answer might be yes. Researchers studying Antarctica's hidden ecosystems are increasingly viewed not just as marine biologists, but as something closer to rehearsal scientists, testing, in the most extreme environment reachable on our own planet, what conditions on a distant icy moon might actually be capable of supporting. None of this means scientists have solved the mystery of what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. If anything, each expedition has produced more questions than it has answered. How far do these hidden ecosystems extend? How are they connected to one another across such enormous ice-covered distances? How old are the oldest organisms living down there, quietly growing in total darkness while human civilization rose and changed entirely on the surface above them? And perhaps, most importantly, how many more of these hidden worlds remain completely undiscovered? Simply because no iceberg has broken away in the right place at the right time, and no research ship has happened to be close enough to notice. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the strange animals themselves, unusual as they are. It's what their existence quietly proves about life in general. For centuries, humans assumed that survival required sunlight, warmth, and open access to the surface world. Beneath Antarctica's ice, colonies of sponges, fields of anemones, drifting ice fish, and solitary octopuses have spent centuries quietly proving that assumption wrong, thriving in total darkness, under crushing cold, sealed away from everything we once considered essential for life to exist at all. It took a single iceberg, breaking free at exactly the right moment, for humanity to finally get a glimpse of a world that had been there the entire time, patiently waiting in the dark for someone to finally come looking. And somewhere beneath the ice that still remains unbroken, stretching across thousands of untouched miles of the Antarctic coastline, there are almost certainly more hidden worlds like this one, still waiting, still unseen, still keeping their secrets exactly where no one has yet thought to look. If this story changed the way you think about what life needs to survive, let me know in the comments. I read every one of them. Hit like if you want more deep sea and Antarctic mysteries like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next discovery. And share this with someone who needs to see what's really hiding beneath the ice.